Hey CodeCrew, in this lesson we're going to set up GitHub and Bitrise in preparation to build our YouTube app. Now both of these tools you can use for free, but first of all, why are we even using these tools? There are two reasons actually. Number one, these types of tools are used in team environments at the workplace, so if you want to get an iOS developer job, then it's good to know. Number two, even as a solo developer, source control helps you manage your code, and continuous integration helps you automate some routine tasks, therefore freeing up your time, which is even more important as a solo. Okay, so here's what we're out to accomplish. First, we're going to create a remote Git repository on GitHub to store our code. Then on our own computer, we're going to create our Xcode project. We're going to create a local Git repository and then point it to the remote one on GitHub. This will allow us to push our newly created Xcode project to GitHub as well as any future code changes. Next, we're going to point Bitrise to our GitHub repo so that each time we push code from our local computer to GitHub, Bitrise is going to get notified. It's going to grab the code from GitHub and run it to make sure nothing's broken. And in the future, we can also add additional steps for Bitrise to automate, such as running tests, notifying team members, making App Store builds, and so on. Everything in this workflow is free, which is a huge plus in my books. Now first we're going to set up our GitHub repository. If you don't have an account, just go to github.com and create a free one. You're going to be able to create private and public repositories, unlimited ones, so why not? I also want to point out that we have a GitHub tutorial on the site, and I'll link to this below, which is going to go through a lot of the steps we're going to go through today. So I just wanted you to be aware that we have this. Lastly, this page is very useful if this is the first time you're setting up GitHub. Again, I'll link to it below. It's going to tell you how to install Git if you don't have it on your local machine, how to add your username and password if you're going to be connecting over HTTPS, which is what we're going to be doing today, and also how to connect over SSH. All right, so if you either have an account or you just signed up for one, you'll see something like this. You can go into the plus symbol right here and go new repository. We're going to set up a new code repo for our YouTube one-day build, and you can name this anything you'd like. I'm going to make it public so that anyone can see the code, but I choose who can submit code to the repo, so that's important. For your own personal projects, you can obviously make it private. I'm also going to initialize this repository with a README, and I'm going to add a git ignore file. If you're not sure what this is, it's basically a file that dictates which files will get ignored, and it won't track changes on these files. Now, why is that important? Because with different languages, sometimes there are personal configuration files that don't really belong in a team source code repository. So if we're talking about Swift, for example, Xcode will have a lot of user settings, personal user settings, to see which panels you had open, what state Xcode was in when you last launched it, so it can launch it in the same state next time. Those sorts of settings don't belong in on GitHub. So that's why adding a git ignore for Swift is not going to upload those sorts of files, and it's going to completely ignore them. Let's create the repository now. All right, so we've got our brand new repo. So the next thing we're going to do, if you remember that diagram, we're going to create the Xcode project. So let's go ahead and launch Xcode here. You're going to create a brand new Xcode project. I'm going to choose single view application, and I'm going to call this the same thing I named my repository. So YouTube one-day build. These settings should be familiar if you've been through the 29-day beginner lessons. Language is Swift, user interface is storyboard, and I'm going to leave all this stuff unchecked down there. Let's click on next. I'm going to save this on my desktop, and source control, I'm going to leave it unchecked because we're going to go through command line and initialize the Git repo and set the remote repository URL and that sort of stuff. I don't want to do it through this user interface because I feel like it's important for you to know how to use the command line, especially I think in a lot of professional team settings, the command line is used. At least that's been my experience. In either case, it's good to know. All right, so we've got our project right here. There's one thing I want to double check because I have the foresight to know if we're going to use Bitrise, it needs to know sort of the configuration on what to run, what to test, and that sort of stuff. And all of that information is detailed in what's called an Xcode scheme. So if you click this button, you can see and click Manage Schemes, you can see that, by default there's one scheme. And if you click Edit on it, you'll see that, for the different things that you can do with the project, building it, running it, testing it, profiling it, and all those sorts of things, there are options that you can configure. So this scheme is what Bitrise is going to read in order to know what to do with the project and how you want to maybe automatically run your tests, or how you want it to be built for what sorts of targets and that sort of stuff. Without diving into it too much, the only thing you really need to do here is make sure that it's shared. So go back to Manage Schemes. If you scroll all the way to the right, there's this shared checkbox here. So just uncheck it and check it, because sometimes the scheme doesn't get generated, like the file doesn't show up in your file directory until you do that for some reason. So I'm going to hit close. It might be an Xcode bug, but here's how you check. So open up your project directory, and you can either right click or hold down Control and click on your Xcode project file, and then choose Show Package Contents. And you're gonna you should have this XC shared data folder. If you go into that, there's this schemes folder, and then there is your scheme. So this file needs to get put under source control, so when Bitrise grabs the code from GitHub, it has access to this scheme and can build and test your app accordingly. So that's why I just want to point it out right now, just so you're aware of it, and later when we put it on GitHub, we can just double check it's there. All right, so now after we've double checked that, we can just close the project for now. And now we're going to launch terminal to create a local Git repository, and then we're going to point it to the remote one on GitHub. So let's open up Spotlight Search. I'm going to open up terminal, and just in case you don't know, you can also use your application launcher and look for terminal as well. All right, so there are a couple of commands here that may be new to you. I have shown them in previous videos before, but just in case you're not aware of them, let's go to this GitHub tutorial that I have on my site. And under step 3, I list some of these common ones that we're going to use. So essentially, we have to navigate to the project directory. I saved it on my desktop, so that's where I need to navigate to. So pwd is going to tell you where or which directory you are at currently. ls is going to tell you or list out all of the files and directories in your current directory. So I see desktop right there. cd space folder name is going to move into that folder. So cd space desktop, and I can hit tab to just auto-complete it, so I don't have to type out the whole thing. Now let's do pwd. As you can see, I am in my desktop, and I know my project folder is called YouTube, but I don't need to type it all out. So I'm gonna hit tab to auto-complete it, hit enter, and now I'm in my project directory. pwd, you can see that I am there. ls, just double check I have my Xcode project and this other folder containing all the Swift files. Okay, now you're gonna hit git space init, and this is going to initialize a Git repository locally. If this command gives you an error, then what you need to do is go to this page I showed you before and make sure you have the latest version of Git installed. It should be installed on your system by default, so there shouldn't be a problem there. All right, so after we specified git init, what we want to do is use this other command called git remote add origin, pointing to our remote repository on GitHub. So if you go back to GitHub and you click this green button, clone or download, you'll see this is the URL, the HTTPS URL to point to this directory, this repository. So we're going to click this button to copy this URL. And just to point out, this, if you hit use SSH, here's the other URL you would use if you were using SSH. So the difference between HTTPS or SSH, those are just two different ways you can access your repository. And again, in this awesome document, it'll tell you the two different ways, connecting over HTTPS or SSH. For this one, you have to generate these keys, which you have to upload to GitHub so that it can identify your machine. So you never have to enter your username and password. Whereas this method, you do have to enter in your username and password, and that's how you authenticate yourself, but you can cache your password, so you only need to do that once. So since this is the recommended way, let's do this way for now. So going back to here, click this green button, clone with HTTPS, copy that URL, and let's go back to terminal here and do git remote add origin and just paste that HTTPS URL there. You shouldn't get any errors, which is great. Now if you type git space status, you'll see that there are no commits yet, and these red files here, these untracked files, means that these files have not been added to the repository yet. Now would be a great time to explain some of this terminology. So what's a commit? Think of a commit like a package of code changes that you want to deliver to GitHub. First, you have to use the add command to manually add the code changes you want to the package, aka the commit. Then when you're all done, you use the commit command to tie up the package and give it a meaningful message to describe what's inside. Now that package is ready to be sent to GitHub. However, you don't have to send it right away. You can start another package of changes first, and then you can save up as many commits as you want before pushing them to GitHub. Now when you're ready and you finally want to push all of those commits or those packages to GitHub, you can use the push command, which will send all your commits to the remote repository on GitHub. Now let's take a look at this in action. So based on what you just saw, what we would need to do is basically add these red files into a commit, right? But before we do that, a good practice, especially when you're working with other people, is to make sure that you have the latest version first. So you want to pull all of the latest code from the remote repository, merge it with the changes that you've made, and make sure that everything works properly before repackaging it up and sending it over. So what we're going to do is we're going to say git pull, which is going to pull the latest from the repository, and we're going to specify that we want to point to origin, which we've set to this repository up here, right? And we're going to specify the master branch. This is the branch of code that we want to pull from. As you can see, by default, you only have one branch, which is the master branch. In the future, you can create different branches of code if you want to, try different things, but you don't want to pollute the main master branch. You can create a separate branch just to test out a feature or to see if you can get something working, and then merge it back to the master branch. The master branch is supposed to be, like the gold standard or the source of truth, the best version of the code, I guess you could say. So anyways, git pull origin master. We're going to grab all of the latest code from the repository. And essentially what we don't have now is this git ignore file and this readme file, because when you go into our folder, you can see we don't have that git ignore file or the readme file. Okay, so anyways, let's execute this command. All right, so it's fetched it, and you can see now in our project directory locally, we have the readme and this git ignore. And this is slightly grayed out because I have hidden files and folders showing. If you don't, then you probably won't see these two. Essentially, this is the git ignore file, and this contains all of the configuration for the Git repo that we've been setting. Okay, so now we can do git status again, and you can see these files are still untracked. So let's go ahead and add them into a commit, package it up, and send it over to GitHub. So we're gonna do git space add space dot, and this is going to add all of the untracked files to our commit. Click that or enter that, and let's do git status again, and you can see all of this stuff is in green now, right? Changes to be committed. These are all the code changes in our commit right now. Let's wrap this guy up. So let's use the commit command and -m is going to allow us to specify a message describing what this commit is about. So let's say this is the initial Xcode project creation. Hit enter, boom. Now we have our commit. Now we can start a new commit, or we can push it to GitHub. I feel like pushing it, so let's go ahead and do git push. And where do we want to push it? To the origin. To which branch? To the master. Let's hit enter. It's going to do its thing. And then now we can come back here, hit refresh, and you'll see that here's our commit message. And here is all of the new code, our Xcode project. Here you can see 2 commits. You can see there it is, the commit that we just pushed. And if you click into the commit, you can see what files were committed and also what changes were made. See all these green means you've added it, right? Red will mean delete, and you'll get used to this sort of these symbols. What else did I wanted to show you here? Oh yes, I wanted to dive into this Xcode project file. If you click into it, remember Xcode schemes, you should have this here. There is our scheme. So Bitrise is going to be able to pick up that file. And one thing to mention before moving on to Bitrise, if any of this feels kind of shaky, don't worry, because over the course of building this YouTube app, you will see me use these tools over and over again. And just through osmosis and paying attention, I'm sure you're going to be able to learn how to use it. At first, it seems complicated, but honestly, it really isn't that complicated once you kind of get the hang of it. All right, now time for Bitrise. So again, this is a tool which has a very generous free tier, and it'll build up to 200 times per month. It doesn't list that here. It's saying that each build can take up to 30 minutes, which is actually a huge amount of time. I think each build should probably only take 1 or 2 minutes. So I don't think you'll ever hit this ceiling unless it's a massive app. And then 200 builds per month is also a lot. If you're not coding every day, even if you are, there's 30 days in a month, 200 builds per month, you can do the math. It's quite a bit for free. So I think it's great. So once you sign up and you get in, this will be what you see. This is a fresh account, so I can walk through this with you. Click on add your first app, and you're going to choose your account. So for me, it's CodeWithChris. I'm going to set the privacy to private. Now, this doesn't have to be the same as what you've set here, right? This is different. Your code repository can be public or private. This is your Bitrise configuration workflow, which you probably don't want to publicize. So you would most likely make this private. So let's go ahead and click next. Now we have to connect it to our code repo. I've already connected it to my GitHub account. If you haven't, there's just a couple buttons you have to click here to authenticate and grab your repos. So you can see here, this is the repo we've been working on, YouTube one-day builds. So let's go ahead and do that. Now you can configure some more complicated access if it needs access to more things, but I don't think this is us. Let's click no auto add SSH key. So this is going to basically allow Bitrise to go and fetch the code from GitHub. It's adding its own SSH key. If I go back to this, that's this, right? Bitrise has added its own SSH key to your GitHub account specifically for that repository so that it can go and grab it. Okay, now let's choose which branch. We only have the default master branch, so let's go ahead and hit master. Okay, so it's gonna do some scanning. Yeah, I was doing some testing earlier, so all right, you're so smart. And give it a few minutes. All right, in a couple of minutes time, it should automatically detect that this is an iOS app, and you can select the export method. So if it's going to basically build your project and create a downloadable or an IPA. So if you don't know, this IPA file is basically the archive which you either send to the App Store or send it to TestFlight for your beta testers or send it to someone. And there are different types that you can create. So for the App Store, obviously, is to submit to the App Store. Ad hoc is just to give to someone to install. And we're going to choose development. Enterprise is if you want to distribute your app to like all of your employees in your company type of thing. So let's choose development. And this is actually, I don't know why it defaults to this old one, but for the iOS stack, you should basically choose what your own system is. So if I take a look at the Xcode version that I'm running right now, it's 11.4. This is, it's saying that it's going to build your project on Xcode 11.1 on macOS Mojave, but I'm going to change it to Catalina. So I'm going to click edit, and I'm actually on this one right here. That's my version of macOS, and that's my version of Xcode. So I'm going to choose that. And doing that is just going to ensure that it's building it the same way you would build it on your system. All right, app icon, we're going to skip this for now. And this webhook is really important because doing this step is going to allow Bitrise to get notified when you push new code into your GitHub repository. So go ahead and click this purple button, and we're all done. Now, if it's kicked off our first test build. So let's click here and go check it out. And actually, this is expected to fail, unfortunately, and I'll tell you why in a second. So we'll just give it a few minutes. Actually, we are not going to give it a few minutes. I'm just going to keep going. We'll let this run in the background. So let me click into the dashboard and show you some cool stuff. So here's the build that's happening. This is the test build that they're running for us. This is our app that we've just set up. If you click into this app, you can see different cool things here. So workflow is basically, a workflow is something that gets run on your code. This is the default workflow. And the reason I said it would fail is because at this point, you can see these are all the steps that it's going to go through. So here it's going to grab the code from GitHub. But at this point, when it gets to this step, it's actually going to fail because this step, archiving it and exporting it, exporting an IPA, a little executable archive, not an executable, an archive. This is going to fail because we haven't set up our provisioning profile. We haven't added our, our private keys and stuff like that. So this is actually not the right step for us. But the good thing is that we can change it. So we'll get to that in a second, and that's why it's going to fail. I want to show you this other thing right here called triggers. So what triggers the workflow that I just showed you? You can manually trigger it, but that's not really fun. Right here you can see that it's actually triggered by us pushing code to the master branch. Right? And then it's going to run this workflow called primary. So you can have multiple workflows for different purposes. Maybe one will send the build to the App Store, one will send it to your friend, maybe one will like run tests or whatever. So you can have different workflows, and you can add different triggers to trigger different workflows. Right now we just have, whenever we push code to our GitHub repository, it's going to run the primary workflow. All right, now let's go back to our dashboard, and as you can see, it's failed. If I click into this, and we can see, why it's failed here. See, no profiles. It couldn't. Basically, it doesn't have some sort of, without diving too much into it, doesn't have our credentials to create that build it needs to. But that's not the thing we want anyways. We just want it to run and build our code to make sure that it doesn't have any errors, it doesn't crash when you try to compile it. So let's go into our workflows and modify that primary workflow a little bit so it's helpful to us. So click on this step, Xcode archive and export, and let's go ahead and click this trash can to delete it. And let's click on this purple button or press Command S to save it. And you can see that step is gone. Now we're going to add a new step. Click this plus, and we are going to search for build, and we're going to choose this one, Xcode build for simulator. So it's going to take our project and build it and try to run it on a simulator, which is exactly what we need for now, as we're going through development. We can configure some of these things for this step. One of the things I'd like to configure is which simulator we want to run it on. I don't want to run it on the iPhone 8 Plus. I want to run it on iPhone 11. So let's do that. Make sure you're typing it in exactly as it should be though for the simulator name. Otherwise, it's not going to find it. All right, let's hit Command S or click this purple button to save it. And then what we're going to do is I could manually trigger it. If we go back to the dashboard, I can just click on our app here and then start a build automatically, but that's no fun. So why don't we try something here? Why don't we start our Xcode project, and we're going to run a build here. I'm just going to do var I equals 0, and I'm going to save it. This code is basically does nothing. And then I'm going to go into terminal. If I do git status, you'll see that there's a change in viewController.swift. So let's add it to a commit. Now let's wrap that commit up. Added a innocent line of code to test Bitrise. Okay, now we need to push it. Git push origin master. And when you try to push it, it might ask you for your credentials. But if you want to save your credentials, again, refer to that document I showed you earlier on how to cache your password and stuff like that. All right, so anyways, it's pushed our code here. And if I just reload this, you can see here, added an innocent line of code to test Bitrise. Cool. Now, if you go back to Bitrise and you go back to dashboard, you can see that it detected, it picked up that push, and now it's building our code. So you can even see here that it's running this latest commit, added an innocent line of code to test, and this one should actually succeed. At least I hope. Otherwise, this would be a terrible demo. Anyways, let's click into this and see. I think it should be nearly done anyways. Just going through this stuff. And see latest simulator for iPhone 11. It's doing it. Compiling viewController.swift. And it's doing it and doing it. And the cool thing is that you don't have to have this dashboard open. You just push your code when you want to push your code, and if it succeeds, it's going to send you an email. If it fails, it'll also send you an email, and you can configure those notifications. But this way, you can rest assured that your code base is always running. So you can see it's nearly done. Success. All right, so that's really cool. And I'm not gonna, for the interest of time, I'm not gonna show you a breaking build, but I'll just describe what would happen if I were to, let's say, write a line of code like this and then accidentally, without testing it, sort of push it to GitHub, and then Bitrise would pick up that change and it would grab the latest and run it. It wouldn't be able to compile this build because, as you can see, this is an error and it's not going to run. But Bitrise is going to catch that error and it's going to send me an email and tell me, hey, the build is broken. Because sometimes the danger is that you don't know you broke the build, and then you keep adding code on top of code on top of code, and then it gets really hard to unravel. So you kind of do want to know as soon as the build is not in a good place. And especially if multiple people are working on the same project, you have multiple people adding code on top of each other, this becomes really helpful. So that's the continuous integration part of it. In the future, when your workflow gets more complicated and you add it, you're going to add tests, you're going to add different sorts of steps to your workflow. Bitrise can help you automate a lot of that. And all you need to do is just go here, go to workflow, and then you can just, build out your workflow for all the steps that you need. You can see that there's a whole bunch of different tasks that you can automate. So if I, just list it out, and we'll get deeper into this as our apps get more complicated. We'll probably use a lot different steps like that. But being a free tier, I think this is pretty cool for both GitHub and Bitrise. All right, this is great. Now that we have our project under source control, we can track our code changes, we can roll back if we need to, add collaborators, and so much more. Also, by hooking it up to Bitrise, we can make sure that our code in source control is working at all times, and to also immediately get alerted whenever someone, most likely myself, checks in code that breaks the build. Because hey, I'm human, you're human, we're all human, we're gonna make mistakes. Now, if you want to check out either of these tools, there are links in the description below. I will mention Bitrise is our partner, but they are a leader in the space for continuous integration, and you can't go wrong by using them. And both of these tools have free tiers, which are perfectly fine, and that's what I'm using as well. Now I want to turn it over to you. Have you used tools like this before? If so, which ones? Let me know by leaving a quick comment below if you haven't done so already. In the next lesson, we're going to check out the YouTube Data API and how to extract information from it. Kind of like an interrogator, but also the API is kind of like a willing subject. Bad example. Anyways, if you've watched to this point, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. I'll see you in the next lesson.